So you want to be a game master? Cool beans. Come on in. Pull up a chair. Take a load off. Today, I am going to talk about selecting your first adventure. And we'll get started right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, I am going to be talking about selecting your first role-playing game adventure because you want to be a game master. But before I dive into that, let me point out, if you are not familiar with myself or with the Gaming Gang, I have been running role-playing games for over 40 years. Yes, I know, I'm old. But over that time, I have picked up a lot of tips. I have a lot of thoughts on how to make your life as a game master, dungeon master, keeper, referee, whatever you want to call yourself, a whole lot easier. Because in my opinion, the most daunting task in all tabletop gaming is that of the game master. And when you're first starting out, if you don't have the right tools, it can be a grind and it can be very discouraging to people who are new to the hobby. And this is a fantastic hobby. It is loads of fun. So that's what this series is about. So I've already talked about how to select I guess we'll say how to pick the correct RPG, the best RPG for you and your group. Talked about table etiquette, also discussed session 0, rolling up characters. And today I am going to talk about some things to look for when you're selecting your first role-playing game adventure for yourself and your group. Should point out, if you are looking for an easy way to jump right on into the hobby, there are loads and loads of starter sets, beginner boxes out there. So as an example, the D&D Essentials Kit, which is kind of their second starter set, has the excellent Dragon of Icespire Peak adventure in it. The starter set before this, which is called a starter set, has the Lost Mines of Fendelver adventure. The Pathfinder 2nd Edition beginner box has a solitaire adventure to kind of get you introduced to some of the concepts of the game, as well as a Game Master run adventure. Although I have to point out, I was a little surprised. The included adventure is a little bit shorter than I would have expected coming from Paizo. I mean, it's not, just a one-shot, but it is a little bit shorter. Maybe you're interested in Call of Cthulhu. They have a fantastic starter set that includes 3 adventures, including one really, really good adventure by Chris Spivey in here as well. Do want to point out the adventures that are included in this starter set have been published previously, but you're getting tons of gaming material. I've also done reviews of the Traveler starter set, the Symborum starter set, the Alien role-playing game starter set. There are quite a lot of starter sets I have reviewed, and a vast majority of them are excellent, and they are packed with gaming material. So you can't go wrong if you're looking to dip your toes in the water with any one of those starter sets, because the adventures are also laid out to present to you the major aspects of that role-playing game system. Because each role-playing game is a little bit different. They all have different beats. And that's why some people dig Pathfinder over Dungeons and Dragons, or vice versa, or they enjoy the old school Renaissance type of adventures from when Dungeons and Dragons was first coming out, or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was pretty much the fantasy role-playing game that you would have. So they're all a little bit different. So some things to look at with your first adventure, and I always recommend when you're getting started as a game master, pick up some published material first. I know a lot of people are super pumped about creating their own worlds, their own settings, making their own adventures, and that is fantastic. Only thing is, when you're first getting started, it can be pretty overwhelming because not only are you looking to do that, you also have all the various different rule systems that you're kind of coming to grasps with. Although I have already shared a video talking about the rules, and don't sweat the rules so much. Just make sure everybody's having a good time at the table. But I always point out, try to check out some published material first, because number one, that'll also give you an idea of how to construct adventures as well. So talking about beats of an adventure or a role-playing game system, let's use Call of Cthulhu as an example. So Call of Cthulhu, if you don't know, is a horror role-playing game that is inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And it's got a lot of investigation. It's got action. It's got combat. But the main aspect of the game is uncovering a mystery. And a lot of times they have to do with the Cthulhu mythos. So, in fact, one of the ways that it's presented by Chaosium Inc., who is the publisher of Call of Cthulhu, is these adventures are kind of like an onion, and the players peel back one layer and there's another layer beneath, and they peel back another and there's another layer beneath. So there's a lot of investigation. So you're looking for investigative beats. Combat is usually pretty deadly, pretty fast in Call of Cthulhu as well. And it's normally against some minor forces of the mythos or other humans. As far as the big bads, the Cthulhus, the Nyarlathoteps of the mythos, you don't go toe-to-toe with them. Especially not with, guns and explosives and things like that. It ain't happening, Dooley. So you're looking for an adventure that's going to have those kind of beats. I'll give you another example. Let's say you're interested in the old school Renaissance. So original Dungeons and Dragons, advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And there are a lot of retro clones out there. There are a lot of what they call fantasy heartbreakers out there that tend to mimic or actually just represent those rules from those earlier games. Those sorts of games tend to have a lot of dungeon exploration. So an introductory adventure there, your first adventure there should have ways for you to understand not only the combat, but also how to explore a dungeon, traps, wandering monsters, encounters, as well as resource management, because one of the big aspects of an old school role-playing game is actually resource management. You're running out of food. You're running out of torches. That's one of the reasons why they have Vancian magic, where you use a spell and it's gone for the rest of the day. And of course, in the old school, you're not getting those spells back just by taking a rest. You're not going to get them back until the next day or a full night's rest. So a major aspect of a starting adventure is to kind of keep your eye on the beats of that role-playing game and how it's going to help introduce these concepts not only to the players, but to help you refine them and remember them yourself. Another kind of starting adventure is what's known as a funnel adventure. These are really big with Dungeon Crawl Classics, which I don't want to say is OSR. It's similar to OSR. It's got a feel of OSR, but it is rather modern in execution. And something like that, you're going to start out, usually your players will have 4 characters, and the adventure tends to be a bit of a meat grinder. So usually by the end of the adventure, the characters who are still standing become the player characters. It's a pretty interesting concept. A lot of those adventures are pretty fun. If as a game master, you're ready right off the bat to start axing characters, which never be afraid to do that. Now, my next video, I am going to talk about running your first adventure, and we will talk about risk and reward and the possibilities of player character death, which should always be there. There should always be some sort of risk involved, but we'll get into that in my next video. So something else that you want to look at in your first adventure, and a lot of this is going to have to do with how long your sessions are going to be. Everybody's a bit different. I know most people these days, their game sessions tend to be about 3 hours. So what you want to do is you want to make sure your first adventure is going to touch upon at least 2 or 3 of the major beats in that game system in your first session. So to give you kind of an example, let's talk about, say, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And we can also kind of toss in 2nd edition Pathfinder as well into the mix here. So you do have the checks to successfully achieve various different things. Maybe, you're trying to find something, you're trying to see something, trying to sense something. You would have a perception check. So you've got a target number you're rolling against with your D20 plus your modifiers, and you're looking to equal or exceed that DC. That is something that you want to be able to introduce early on in the adventure. Same thing with social interactions, especially if, once again, and Call of Cthulhu has the same kind of thing where, maybe you're trying to debate somebody, or you're fast talking your way past, a guard at the door or something like that, or a bouncer outside at, a nightclub or speakeasy, and you're trying to fast talk them. Of course, I always recommend that the player characters actually, they don't necessarily have to act out what they're saying, but they have to tell you what they're doing. I am not a fan of players who just say, oh, well, I'm going to make my athletics check then. Roll my 20-sided die. Snore. Tell me what you're doing. I don't allow people to make skill rolls or anything like that unless they tell me what they are doing. And I would hope you as a game master will as well, because another thing in your first adventure is you are also trying to instill good habits into your players. That we'll talk about once again in running your first adventure, but keep that in mind. So, as I mentioned, you want to have at least 2 or 3 of the major beats of your game system in your first session of the adventure. So, going back to, say, D&D or Pathfinder, of course, combat is a big deal as well. Want to try to get in at least a small combat so that the players can not only get their feet wet, but also kind of pump up the excitement, because usually, combat gets people, let's go. We're ready. Well, we're playing now. Gets them pumped up. So you should probably be able to introduce a small combat. You never want, and it doesn't matter if it's your first adventure or, your 500th adventure. You never want an entire session devoted to just one thing. That just drags on, and that just sucks the life out of a role-playing game group. And I know there are people out there, they could sit there and play Pathfinder all day and just fight off wave after wave after wave after wave after wave of the same monsters attacking, and they love it. if that's how you and your group want to play, go ahead. I mean, it's your game. Have fun your own way. But the vast majority of gamers out there, they would not have a great time with a 3-hour-long combat taking place. That's the whole session. Because another thing is, you're probably not going to wrap it up. If you're already at 3 hours in a combat, you're probably not going to be wrapping it up right there at the end of the session. So something to keep in mind as well. Last thing you want to keep in mind is you want to get an adventure that is engaging and that makes sense. I know there are loads and loads of adventures out there, and there is also loads and loads of garbage out there as far as role-playing game adventures. That is just the facts. Just like there's a lot of shovelware for PC games, there is a lot of shovelware role-playing game adventures. So it can be kind of a crapshoot, especially if you utilize drive-through RPG, which I am a huge fan of. People tend to give 5-star reviews to stuff that's just barely 2 stars. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got an adventure that's engaging and that is also going to make sense. Because if you're using a published adventure, one of the first things your players are going to do is they are going to deconstruct that adventure as they play. And if something does not make sense, they are going to see it right away. And then you're left trying to figure out, how do I stitch this back together? And a lot of times if an adventure does not really tie together, it doesn't fit logically, as you're coming up with something like, well, it's because of this. You're actually going to be stuck later on down the line as far as, well, wait a second. You originally said it's because of this, but now it's because of that. And it just becomes a complete disaster. So be very, very careful when you're looking at a first level adventure or introductory adventure. I definitely recommend checking out reviews, not just over at thegaminggang.com. Go to RPGnet. Go everywhere you possibly can to get some solid reviews about adventures. I mean, there are some fantastic introductory adventures for various different role-playing games as well. So there you have it. Those are just a few things that I think are very important when you're selecting your first adventure for your new group that you're going to be running role-playing games for. All right. Once again, next episode, I am going to talk about running your first adventure. And we'll also kind of talk a little bit about kind of instilling good habits in your players as well. All right. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. If you do subscribe, ding that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also let you know when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday through Thursdays right here on YouTube as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news. Although I do want to mention, as of this recording, the Dispatch is on hiatus until March 15th. I'm on a little bit of a break. I'm not on vacation, but a little bit of a break. Thank you so much for watching. And of course, as I wrap up all my videos during this never-ending pandemic, I also hope all of you out there are being smart and staying safe. Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, if you haven't subscribed to the Gaming Gang channel yet, click right here. If you'd like to see the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch, click right up there. And if you want to trust YouTube's algorithm to give you something to watch, click right there. Once again, thanks so much for watching, and everybody please wear a mask.